I have been waiting to play Heartworm since the demo. It was very interesting. It just caught my eye, shall we say. But what is it? Heartworm is an indie game developed by a small little team. It's a classic inspired survival horror, very much aimed at the PS1 era, classic Resident Evil, classic Silent Hill. Very much fits in that vein. It follows the story of Sam, who has recently lost her immediate family members and has heard of a place called a threshold, which is basically considered this link to the afterlife. And she goes to try and get answers, basically, and you follow her on that journey. I think the fastest way I can summarize Heartworm is it's just good, classic survival horror. Whatever you're thinking of when you think of a game that is inspired by Resident Evil or Silent Hill, you're probably about halfway there. It's got the really Resident Evil layout, design work. That's what I'm thinking of how it designs its areas. You go through three major areas and one that's like sort of closer to a tutorial area. You go through a neighborhood, a woodlands area, and the clock tower. And they're all got their own like forms of puzzles, forms of how you're going to be getting around various levels of interconnectivity. For instance, the woodlands area is literally a loop. You can't get out of it. It's just a loop. It's clearly made by people that love those classic games. You know, it has the classic find problem, go look for solution design philosophy, where you have to look for various keys and objects that will help you solve puzzles, unravel the story. There is also a degree of optional stuff that you can go out of your way to find, some of which can impact the ending, which we'll talk about in a second. And it's all about creating that tension and that feeling, and really getting you into the experience of surviving the horror. But it also has some really cool innovations that put it on my radar more specifically. For one thing, you don't fight with a gun; you use a camera as your weapon. All the enemies in the game, they're variations of like weirdness. So the first lot of enemies are static people, like TV static turned into people. And then you get like creepy woodland dogs and statues that will attack you, and then eventually monsters. But they're all sort of conjurations, I suppose you could call them. So you don't use a gun, you use a camera, which has some really interesting drawbacks, as the game is also set in the 90s, I think. So it takes a second for the flash to come back, you know? So you've got to wait between your shots. It's fucking painful. But ultimately, that's more of an aesthetic difference. You still have a weapon. What stuff that's more important is stuff like the aiming. This game comes with a set of options that basically turn it from a classic survival horror to one that is kind of more reminiscent of something like RE1 HD remaster remake thing, whatever the bleeding thing's called, you know, the remake of RE1. And when it comes to the aiming, that is whether you want to tank control your aiming, so just as you would in like a classic survival horror game, or if you want to do third person camera for it. This is a really cool distinction. It's one of the reasons I'm really into Holston as well, where you zoom into the third person when you try and shoot something. It creates this really like fun dynamic when you're in the middle of a fight. It can be a bit disorienting when you try and take a shot, then you have to get out of the third person to rejig yourself, move yourself out of the way, and then go back into it. It's a fun little idea of tension. It also gives you the versatility to check your surroundings a bit better, you know, which is always just a fun little thing. You can also do this with movement. You can either use traditional tank controls or modern controls. So player relative. That's what I'm looking for. Camera relative, I think, is what it actually is, isn't it? I did try and dabble with tank controls right at the start, but it's probably because I was using a stick. It felt a bit unwieldy. On a D-pad, it's probably a bit easier, but I did choose to go with modern, which did just kind of smooth out the process. One of the really cool options for it, though, between this like classic versus modernization whole factor thing, is that you can go between pixelated or modern graphics. Pixelated is literally imagine you threw on Resident Evil 1 through 3, you know, and modern is roughly the same thing, but smoothed out. It still has like the PS1, PS2 styled graphics where you have like, you know, the really smoothed over character models and stuff. It's purely a personal preference thing. I think the pixelation looks pretty good. I personally didn't play with it though. I don't know how to explain this. when when it's a more modern game, I feel like pixelation just comes across really weirdly. I think when it was a tech limitation, it was one thing, but now I feel like it just makes things difficult to see in a way that wasn't the case when you had more pixelated games back in the day. I maybe that's just me, but that's an issue I have. So I did play with modern, and the game looks pretty damn good. Again, small team, you can't expect too much from them, but aesthetically, they've done a fantastic job with the design work. And the game as a whole very much lives in this space of being between classic survival horror and a more modern release. As you know, there is a bit of a wave right now. I think there's always like not always, but for a while now, they've been trickling out right these classic inspired survival horror games, and this one very much lives in that realm. What I think this one does really well is really just the vibes, you know, the immaculate vibage. Because on a surface level, at standard, it's pretty much what you expect. There is not a whole lot of crazy stuff going on in this video game. It's going to be a survival horror that you feel is reminiscent of one's past. In some areas more than others. There's actually an area in the clock tower that is it's inspired by RE1. And by inspired I mean it's a reference. It's the same thing. The safe room under the staircase, under the corner staircase in RE1, where Wesker leaves you some resources at one point. That staircase and the accompanying upstairs, including the two enemies on the top staircase, are in the game. I was genuinely, I thought I was going crazy when I saw it, but it's there. What was I saying? Vibes. Yes, vibe. So it's a pretty standard survival horror experience for the most part. What it does really well is just the feeling of it. The whole premise of the game is basically the concept of dealing with grief, of finding yourself. And in that journey, our main character, Sam, she crosses through to this bizarre alternate world, and she goes through what is effectively a representation of her past, her present, and her future. That's what the three areas are. And these three areas really do just make the game. So you have the first area, which is the neighborhood. The neighborhood is meant to be where she grew up, and it's these snowy streets, small houses, sort of like small town feel. It's got this really fun aspect that I didn't clock on until I realized the whole past, present, future thing, where things aren't where she remembers them being because her memories of her her life as a child. It's not the same when you grow up, right? Things seem smaller, and they they change because your memories they don't really stay factually accurate, right? But it's got this really cool like mystery element. Is Mystera a word? No, I'm getting that from Professor Layton, aren't I? Like a vibe of mystery from the grandparents' house specifically, this really like foreboding nature. You combine that with the fact that even before the draw distance has allowed the enemies to load in the static TV people, you can like see them sparking off in the distance. And it just creates this really like lonely, isolated vibe, which does wonders for this portion of the game. And this sort of then transitions because through the funeral home, which I'm now just realizing the significance of, you cross over into this next area that's still part of the neighborhood, but sort of shows the next stage of Sam's life, basically. Which also, for some reason, includes a fight with a giant spider. We'll talk about the boss fights in a bit. Then you have the second area, which is the wild, the woodlands. I can't remember what the area is actually called for some reason. It's driving me nuts. It's a woodlands area. This is Sam's present, which is basically where she was in herself right before we meet her in the game. It's a very different vibe from the neighborhood area. It at first it feels quite disorientating because it's not often in survival horror games where you enter like these really open, colorful areas. I wouldn't expect just a regular a regular ass woodland to be in my survival horror game. You know, it's not what you come looking for. But it actually works surprisingly well because after you've been in the area for a little while, you start coming across these weird dog enemies or the statues that only attack you when you get close. This area is basically representative of where she goes after her grandfather dies, which I think is the specific loss that triggers these events of the narrative. And she mentions that it was like a safe space for her and a grounding experience, but she stopped going after a deer was killed in the area or something, which is I think is meant to be sort of talking about how like death can, taint your safe space sort of thing. But the Woodlands has this really like fucked up side to it as you get deeper in, where there's this tree with a heart attached to it, and there's like these creepy little veins that spread across the area. It's really quite freaky. And there's an area, I think it's called the library or something like that, and its only purpose is it has like a podium that you deposit blood into. It's really weird. And then for the third hour, you get the third area, you get the clock tower. The clock tower is meant to be representative of her future, of her sort of rushing her to her demise, sort of thing. Thematically, this is where she comes to accept that by searching for answers about death, she's kind of rushed herself toward the end and she's not appreciating life as it goes. And that's kind of the ending message of the game, which is a really nice thing. It's just to slow down, live in the moment, and appreciate what you have while you have it, sort of thing. But the clock tower as an area is really cool because you have the initial clock tower, and the basis of this area is to work your way up to the top, bit by bit. And the gimmick for the clock tower is there are these doors locked behind emblems. It's the classic you need a funny key. These funny keys are in the shape of reliefs and they each have like Greek letters on them. There's four of them. And behind each of these four areas, there is a really weird shift in reality, like a complete shift. You stop being in the clock tower effectively and you enter an area that is sort of like a major part of life. You have the hospital, which is all about obviously birth and death. You have the school, you have a subway, and there's another one that I am currently forgetting. Workplace. There's a workplace because it's the worst one. Not in terms of its design, in terms of how it made me feel. And these areas all act as like independent puzzle areas, sort of like even smaller puzzle boxes. You do one key puzzle, you get the item, you put that in a pedestal, which gets you closer to unlocking the roof. The clock tower has a really fun vibe because at first it's this really like messed up, ethereal, like otherworldly clock tower. Nothing makes sense. It just so happens the clock is counting down to midnight. I'm sure that's a coincidence. You've got all that kind of stuff. And then you have these transitions into important areas that make sense within her life. The workplace is all about like how you find value in your life, getting trapped in a dead end job sort of thing while you're working for nothing. We all know the gist. And you also get to like experience her future house, which sort of hints at not only some of the more pleasant moments in her life, but also her eventual death. And it all creates this really quite foreboding sense. But basically, as you go through the game, as you explore these individual areas, I think it does something that a lot of survival horrors don't do as well. Most survival horrors will have multiple areas. So if you think of, I don't know, RE4, it's on the mind. You have the village, then you have the castle, then you have the island, right? And they each play their own separate way. They each have their own gimmicks. They each have their own story purposes, or all this shenanigans. They don't change things up too much. It's more like you've spent a couple hours in this area. Let's have a change of scenery. Heartworm does this to like a whole other degree because each area kind of builds a pillar of the narrative, the vibe, the theming. And by the end, you've really come full circle, which is interesting because the game doesn't dive too much into specifics when it comes to the story. You get a lot of implications in terms of Sam's backstory, how she was feeling before she came here. But there's not a whole lot of specifics. We don't know if there was like any weird circumstances when the granddad died. You just sort of meet her, you get the vibe, you understand why you're there, and it's sort of it's a universal meaning, right? It's something you can all understand. So it's very easy to just link up with the journey as you go, and by the end, you actually have a pretty nice message. And these areas, their puzzles, their construction, the aesthetic, the visuals of them, they really do make the game, which is good because a lot of it's kind of easy. It's where we're going to talk about like combat and stuff. So the thing with combat is it's not bad. It is very simple though. A lot of the thing with survival horrors is the threat of it all comes from not only the enemy, it's also how many hits they take to go down, and it's how much space you have to work with. A lot of the key thing I've been playing RE1 recently. A lot of the key thing with that game is there's not a whole lot of room to maneuver. If you want to get through someone, you've got to take them down there and work with the space you've got, and you do run the risk of using every bullet you've got on the same guy. A lot of Heartworm is designed in these semi-open areas. So the neighborhood, for instance, pretty much every enemy that's in sort of like the main street area, you can just go around. It's not all that difficult. There's one in particular. There's a corridor that links one half of the neighborhood to the other. And after you've been through it once, an enemy starts to spawn. But they always, assuming you go through the corridor fast enough or something, the enemy is always stuck in their animation of dragging themselves out the wall before they start coming to get you. So you just ignore them. There's not a whole lot of difficult encounters in the game. There are some. One of the early ones is the apartment. There's two red TV static people, and the red ones they like phase in and out of existence, so you can't shoot them or take a picture of them when they aren't like there. You still see their red like hue chasing after you, but you don't see them. So that presents a bit more difficulty. But again, that's because you're in a tight like apartment corridor. There's not a whole lot of room to maneuver. A lot of the game doesn't really have this, so quite a solid portion of it can feel a bit more like you want to avoid enemies in survival horror. Typically, you want to avoid them if you can. In Heartworm, it feels like it is encouraged because it's just kind of easier. There's a lot of space to work with most of the time. It's not all that difficult, especially in the woodlands area. The woodlands area is where you start to see a contrast, where you get half like some of the enemies you kind of just want to deal with, and some of them there's rarely much point in fighting. So with the woodland area, you have the dogs, and if the dogs see you, you're better off dealing with them because they're pretty quick. If you want to actually explore an area, you're best off dealing with them because they kind of prowl around. But the statue people, they only trigger if you get within a certain distance. So in that case, just don't get in the distance. There's there's only a couple of them where you absolutely have to, and even then you sort of can avoid them. I think I had one close call, but other than that, it wasn't that bad. It kind of goes similarly for the clock tower area. The main thing with the clock tower area is you get introduced to these new enemies that are sort of like a cross between lickers. Oh, sorry, my voice went there. Lickers and the things from Silent Hill 2 that crawl around the ceiling. They start on the ceiling, then when you get close enough, they drop down and they just hop after you. Now, I think I was under the impression these were more dangerous than they were because I killed like every single one I came across until quite near the end when I tried just running past them. They hop after you and they're pretty much always on your tail, but they never seem to hurt you. So I think I could have just run past all of them, which is a bit of a problem. So this is probably one of the weakest areas of the game is its combat balance. But I think a lot of indie survival horror games have this issue. There's also not like that I can remember even seeing there's not like much of a difficulty setting or anything to make it harder for yourself. It's kind of a shame because I think the economy was good, ammo economy was good. I should say there was only a few stages where I really ended up stocking up on film, which is this game's version of ammo. But health, on the other hand, I had an abundance of healing items by the end of the game, an abundance. So I mean, I could just be getting better at these. I have played a few of them now. That is entirely possible, but I doubt that's what it is. So make of that what you will. This also does transition into the bosses. So each of the free area has a boss on at the end of it. That's what I'm looking for. Toward the end of it, you kill the boss, you get a important story item, and that unlocks the next area. The bosses again are quite easy. So the neighborhood ends with a spider boss fight, which I will not show on the screen for everyone's sake. it's it's quite unpleasant to look at in the cutscene. Fortunately, in game it's kind of further away, so it's not too much of a problem. The spider's whole thing is it scurries around. It's awful quick, but you can shoot it quite consistently. It does one attack where it like turns around on you and shoots webs, and I wasn't smart enough to get out of the way, so I did get hit by that like every time. The main issue is when you hit it enough times, it jumps up out of the arena and it like sends spiderlings at you, exploding spiderlings. They get close enough and they pop. But as long as you're like running away from them, it's normally fine. It's not too difficult. I did need to heal afterwards though. The Woodlands boss is a deer creature, and this one is it's hide and seek. The deer like runs off, and you have to try and find which patch of trees it's hiding in, which is kind of funny. I'm not gonna lie. It does a bit more damage, but as long as you jump the initial like slam it does when it notices you're onto him, it's not too bad. And then you have the final boss, the keeper, the tape keeper, I think it's called. The tape keeper is definitely the most like traditional boss. You don't shoot it during the first like bit. You dodge its attacks, and then it will start. It will lower. That's the word I'm looking for. It will lower a bunch of lamps. You have to take pictures of the lamps to light them up. There's 5 of them. I think it might start as 4 and then goes to 5 in phase 2. You do that. You shoot the tape master in the face, and that's like 1 hit. And you do that, I think, 4 times. Twice in phase 1, twice in phase 2. So these bosses aren't hard, but they are fun. I will say that they're fun. Thematically, they're interesting. The introduction of the spider is creepy as hell. The deer thing, like trying to hunt it down in the trees, is hilarious. Especially because like it sticks out like a sore thumb, so you just have to find the bit it's run to. It's not that hard. And the tape master's really cool with like the dodging attacks and stuff. It's got the sense of spectacle, even if it's not like the most interesting boss fight. I do still appreciate the shooting of the lamps, though. That's always a fun little mechanic, right? You because he does still like fire attacks at you while you're doing this. But again, I think the game kind of gets not gets away with it. That makes it sound like it's committing like a crime. It, it, it's fine because it's a really nice, simple survival horror game. The areas are fun to go through. There's a good amount of story to put together. There are some secrets as well. I don't understand it, but there are like possums or something just like around. You take a picture of them, they spin around, disappear, and make a noise. I don't know how many of them there are. I don't know what happens when you get them all. I'm assuming outfits because I've just this second remembered that there's an area in the first house where you can change your outfit, and there's like 6 of them, I think. There's also some amount of replayability. The endings I mentioned earlier, there are multiple endings. There's 3 endings. There's a bad ending, good ending, and the best ending sort of thing. And it's dependent on these pictures you find. In each of the area, there's this giant static object. You find out how to get to it, take a picture of the static, which makes that go away, and then you get a picture. You get these pictures and you can deposit them into an area in the archive. The archive is like the hub area where you go after you complete each area. And the ending you get is dependent on how many of those pictures you found. I get why it's this way because there's only one of them that is insidiously obvious. So chances are, statistically, you'll get one, which gets you the good ending. If you get 0, you get the bad ending. And if you get all 3, you get the best ending. I found 2, and I couldn't tell you where the second one could be. Part of me's kind of tempted to play it again just to see, but I'll think about it. And obviously, it is still a survival horror, and it is a classic inspired survival horror. So it is puzzle boxy. There's a lot of room for optimization. You can remember pathways and where things are and stuff. I reckon there is an achievement for finishing the game in under an hour. I finished it in 4 in-game time, 4 hours of in-game time. So 1 hour seems quite conceivable. But that does leave a lot of room for like, speed runs and stuff. And I don't know about challenge runs. I think there's more to this game than I saw. For instance, like you can get camera mods, which are like weapon attachments sort of things. I found one, precisely one, and it was like a 3-round burst for each click. I can't imagine how much I would have needed how many more shots I would have needed to take if I didn't have that. I don't know how much difference it makes to my damage and everything, but it was fun. So that's cool. But I only ever found the one mod. There is an option to remove mods, and you do get a tutorial screen for it. So I have to assume there are other mods in the game, and I just didn't find them. Basically, I think the game has more to offer than I'm aware of, but not too much more. But there are definitely some fun puzzles and stuff. You get a lot of like mini ones. There's a chess situation that you can solve, like the daily chess puzzle things. You get like one of those. It's you have one move to find the solution thing, and you get a small reward for it. Nothing crazy, but it's nice that you have that. And some of the puzzles in the game are quite fun, which I consider quite important to survival horror games because honestly, I think the puzzle element of survival horror games is arguably more important than the combat sometimes. Don't shoot me. Like that's just how I feel. You've got some really fun ones. You've got some where it's um, beneficial for you to write stuff down. That's always fun. And overall, the game's just a really solid package, which is a good thing because it's not super heavy on story. There is a story. There's a nice little cameo by Susie Hunter, Sphere Hunter on YouTube, who you should know if you like survival horror games. She's in there somewhere. It's a fun little game and I enjoy it a lot. I think it's pretty easily replayable. Like I said, I finished it in 4 hours. It's a very nice thing to just be able to like plonk on and you can finish it in like an afternoon, similar to the appeal of some other survival horror games. But obviously, it's an indie game. It is. I think it was largely conceived by one dude. There is a pretty. There's a really fun credits roll at the end of the game. I think the team wasn't a lot of people. I'll put the credits on screen so you can get like an idea. And it seems like most people committed to several different roles, but a lot of the work was done by seemingly the guy that came up with the idea. So you shouldn't have expectations that are too crazy anyway. Clearly, they are inspired very much by classic survival horror. It feels like a really nice mix of Resident Evil and Silent Hill. It's just another of these retro-inspired survival horrors that you can add to the list. I personally love going back to play Crow Country every now and again. I'm still very excited about Holston when that comes out. And I think this one has a great vibe. I think it's a really nice one to just be in. And I personally like the messages it has going on and the themes it's got. I think it could be fun just to see how different the game looks if I play the whole thing pixelated as well. So yeah, I'd absolutely give Heartworm a go if you're a big fan of survival horrors. And that's the main one. If you if you like survival horrors, specifically PS1 era, PS2 horror era survival horror games, absolutely do give this one a shot. And yeah, I think that's it for the video. So I'll see you in the next one.